Okay, it's time for your Friday video. So it's not going to be anything new. I'm just going to work a couple more examples of the ones we worked in class about making payments. So you've got a worksheet, and part of your homework was for Wednesday night, and then the other part of that worksheet goes along with making payments. So that's what this is on. All right, I'm going to share my screen with you, I hope. We'll give it a whirl, see if I can pull this PowerPoint up and see how it goes. Okay, so we're still doing making payments. All right, so look at this example. It says Mr. Grove borrows $6,500 from a bank at 9% compounded quarterly and must discharge, that means pay off the debt, by making equal payments at the end of each quarter for 3 years. So every 3 months, he's making a payment. Find the amount of each payment. So I'm making payments, so there's my formula, okay? So, we went over that formula in class. So this formula is the same one that should be in your notes. So remember what I said, there's a P, an R, an I, and an N. So I'll go over to the side and write those down. So P is the beginning amount. So I started out with $6,500. So that's my initial debt. So that went for P. I don't know what R is. Remember, R is your payment, and I'm asking to find the payment. Now your interest rate is 9% per year, and your time is 3 years. Now those match, but remember when we're doing payments, it's got to be matching and be the word that follows compounded. So it says compounded quarterly. So that means everything's got to be in terms of quarters. So I changed that 9% to a decimal, 0.09. Remember how you change percent to a decimal is you move the decimal 2 to the left, you divide by 100. Now, why did I divide by 4? Because how many quarters are in a year? 4. So if it takes a whole year to get 9%, if I only do 1 quarter for 3 months, I won't be up to 9% yet. So I divided it by 4 and got 0.0225. Now, this one came out exact. If it doesn't come out exact, you may have to round, but I try to take it really far out before I try to round, okay? And then again, it's 3 years, but I need it in quarters. So there are 4 quarters in a year, so there are 12 quarters. So there are 12 3-month intervals, okay? So everything's in terms of quarters, so now I substitute in. My P is my 6,500. I don't know R, so it stays R. 1 minus 1 plus. Now my interest rate, remember, I have to do it the one that's per quarter, so it's that 0.0225. I have a negative, that's the negative is part of your formula, and then my N was 12 quarters, so it was a 12. And that I is still that same I. So you've got to follow your order of operations. So remember, the first thing you look for are parentheses. So I have to add those numbers first, and I got that number. All right. So I don't have anything else inside of a parenthesis to do. So remember, next thing I look for exponents, and I've got an exponent. So I've got to type that in my calculator and raise it to the -12. And like we talked about in class, there's a minus button on your calculator and there's a negative key. You cannot interchange them. So if you use the minus key, it's going to give you an error message. So make sure you're using the negative key. Okay, so if you can't find that after class, let me show you. All right, so I take that number and raise to the -12, and I get this big long number. Now, that's not really exact. I just took it all the way out. My calculator rounded off for me here, so I took it all the way out because I don't want to round off and get a little error here that turns into a big error later. So then I said 1 minus that decimal number, and I got 0.234332525. All right. So now what do I do? Well, now I've got to take that number and divide by that number. So again, I took it as far as my calculator would go. So you understand at this point, this is what's on my paper. And I want to get R by itself. So I've got to get rid of this number. Now, what does it mean when you have a number next to a bracket? Doesn't that mean to multiply them? Well, how do you undo multiplication? Don't you divide it in division, the inverse of multiplication? So I divided this side by that number, and if I divide this side by that number, I got to divide that side by that number. So remember, that one is going to go out and just leave me R. And then when I took 6,500 divided by this 10.41477882, I got this long answer on my calculator. Okay, but remember, I'm doing money, so I've got to go to the nearest hundredth. So I'm worried about this third number. Since that number is 3, the number in front stays the same. So it's $624.11, not $624.12. So we're rounding off. Now, that answers the question, okay? So I know that, let me kind of clear all this, maybe. All right, I know that this is my monthly payment, and that's all that I asked you. But what if I had asked you instead, so what's the total amount you end up paying? So you understand you're doing $624 a month every month. I mean, excuse me, not every month, every quarter. So I've got to go back and see how many times I'm doing that. Well, I'm doing it 12 times. There are 12 quarters. So that's my payment every quarter. I misspoke. It's not every month, it's every quarter. So I said that number times 12. So by the end of the time, I've really paid more than $6,500. I paid $7,488. That's the total amount that I paid back at the end. So what if I ask you, well, how much interest did you pay? So, you know, interest is always your end amount minus your beginning amount. So I borrowed $6,500 and I paid back that much. So the difference would be $988. So I paid my $6,500 that I borrowed, plus I paid an extra $988 in interest. So always make sure you're answering the question. All they asked me was to find the amount of the payment, so I could have stopped there. I just went and did these two because some of your homework problems ask you to do some of that. Okay, let's look at another one. Okay, and this other one I kind of turned into two parts. All right, look what this one says. This one says that Taylor wants to buy a car. So this car sells for $21,000, but she's got an old car that she can trade in. Now her old car, they'll give her $1,800 for that old car. So she's going to finance the remainder, what's left, at 6.75% compounded monthly for 5 years. So I asked, what would her monthly payment be? Now again, with payments, here's my formula. So I'll go over here and put a P and an R and an I and an N. Now, where in the world did I get $19,200? I thought the car cost $21,000. But remember, she's trading this in. So they're going to take this amount off of that amount. So when I said the car cost $21,000, I subtracted the $1,800 that they're giving her for her car. So that's where I got $19,200. So if you got a down payment, you would take that amount off. Or if you had a trade-in, you would take that amount off. So this is the amount that I've got to borrow from the bank or from the car dealership. Okay, that's the amount I'm financing. Okay, so if you got a down payment, take your car amount minus your down payment. If you got a trade-in, you would take your car amount minus your trade-in. And this is the remainder that I'm going to have to borrow and finance. All right, so there's my R, my P. I don't know my R. Remember, my R is my payment. Here's my interest rate. Doesn't say, so it must be per year. And I'm going to do it for 5 years. Now, I know that those match. So remember, on simple interest, that would be good enough. But on compound, it's got to be the word that follows compounded. And this one says compounded monthly. So I've got to change everything to months. So I took that interest rate and divided by 12. Now, remember, I didn't divide 6.75. I've got to drop that and then divide by 100. In other words, move that decimal 2 to the left. So that's where I got the 0.0675. So you got to change your percent to a decimal before you divide by it. So that's my amount per month, okay? And I've got to do it for 5 years, all right? So 5 times 12 came out to be 60. So now it's in months and it's in months and it says compounded in months. So all that matches. So I substitute in. So I put in my 0.005625 in right there for my I, and I put it in down there for I. I've got to follow my order of operations. Remember, we said parenthesis first. So I've got to say 1 plus that and put it here. Okay, now what you might want to do is you might want to stop the video and go work this problem by yourself and then come back and make sure that you got the same answers that I got and then unfreeze it. Okay, instead of just watching me, don't try to write down all these numbers while I'm talking. So either freeze it and write it down and then come back and listen, or vice versa. Okay, I don't want you to get lost. All right, all I did was add 1 to that number. Remember, after you do your parenthesis, you got to do your exponent. So I took my calculator and raised that number to the -60. So you freeze it and try that and make sure that you do get this number on your calculator. All right. Then I've got to subtract those two numbers. And again, double check you actually do on your calculator and make sure you get the same thing I did, because I could have made a mistake. If I did, you can tell me on Monday and we'll fix it. Then I have to divide these two numbers. So again, you understand, here's what I end up with on my paper. Okay. But I want R by itself, so I've got to get rid of this 50 number. So I divided this side by that number, then I had to divide that side by that number. So they went out over here and just left me R. And then when I took 19,200 and divided by this 50.8040704, 44, then I got this number, this long number, but I had to round to the nearest penny. So because that was a 2, that stayed 92. So $377.92 would be my monthly payment. So I'd pay that every year for 5 years. So understand, I'm going to pay that payment 60 different times. I'm going to write 60 checks. Okay. Now come down here and I said, well, let's change the problem a little bit. What if instead Taylor called the bank and he found a bank that would give him a lower rate, but he's got to do it longer. Okay. So 6.5%, but now he's going to take 6 years to pay it off. But the rate's a little better. All right, let's go see what the difference would be in our monthly payment. So I came over here again, that's how much I owe. This time I had to divide that number by 12. So I took that 6.5 and moved the decimal 2 to the left. That's where I got that 0.065. Now it didn't come out pretty, so I rounded it a little bit. Okay, and then 6 years times 12 is 72 months. So I'm going to make 12 more payments down here than I make up here. Okay, let's see what happens. So I'm just going to substitute the numbers in there. Now my advice again would be to freeze the video and go work this by yourself and then come back and double check and see if you got the right answers. Okay. All right. So either you didn't freeze it or you're back. All right. So I add 1 to that number because we do parentheses first. Then I type that number into my calculator and raised it. Usually, your arrow key is like a caret key. Your power key is probably a caret key, to the -72. All right. And then I went and got that number when I did that. So I subtracted that number from 1 and got this number. Now look what I've got. I got to divide this long decimal by that long decimal. And I got this long number, like 59.488645516. Well, I want R by itself. So I've got to divide this side by that number. So I got to divide this side by that same number. So that left me R right here. And then when I divided these two numbers on my calculator, I got this really long number right here. But again, I'm trying to get it to the nearest penny. And because that's a 0, that's going to stay a 75. Now, you think, well, of course, I would rather pay $322.75 instead of paying $377.92. So I'm going to go get this car payment. Well, you might, but you might not. See, I'm going to take my calculator. How would I figure out the total that I paid up here? So I know I'm paying $377. It's hard to do this thing. 0.92 times, how many times am I doing that? That doesn't really look like a 3. So I'm doing 377.92, and I'm doing it 60 times. All right, so let's see how much money that is. So that's $377 and what did I say? 92 cents times 60. Now, when I did that, I got $22,675 and a decimal, and it's got a 2. So I'm going to have to remember, well, that means I don't have anything right there. So that's $22,675.20 I'd pay for the car by the time I paid it off. Well, down here, let's see how much I'd pay for the car. I'm going to do that $322.75, but I'm got to do it 72 times. So let's go see how much I pay. So if I do 322.75 times 72, I get $23,238. No pennies. That's kind of weird. So there's how much I paid for the car, and here's how much I paid for the car. So if you're really the buyer, you're going to have to make a decision. Now, there's not a right decision. There's just a decision. This, I'm going to end up paying more for the car than I would pay for the car if I did this. Okay? So not quite $1,000 more. So this ends up costing me more money total than this one does. So I might say, well, you know what? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna pay $377.92 because I don't want to pay an extra like almost $1,000. But some people are like, well, every month it'd be easier for me to come up with it'd be easier for me to come up with $322 than $377. So I know that I'm going to end up paying more for the car, but I'd rather have a lower payment every month. That works better for my budget. So you'd have to decide. So one of your homework problems asks you to decide. And so I didn't work it yet. Now, I sure wouldn't want to pay a higher payment and more money. So if both of them are bigger, then it's an easy decision. But sometimes in the real world, you have to decide. Do you want to pay more money overall with a lower payment every month, or do you want to pay a little bit higher payment and then less overall? All right. So I need you to kind of try your homework. All right. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay. So let's kind of stop that share. You go do your homework and let me know if you have any questions on it. All right. I'll see you on Monday. I hope you have a great weekend. All right. Let's see if we can stop recording. Bye.